Well, it's 4 o'clock, so I'm going to make a start. Rob, can you just confirm that you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, no problem, John. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rob. Welcome to you all online and in the room. So this is the Brussels meeting of the AI Assurance Club. We've got a couple of cameras set up in the room. Hopefully you can see us okay. I will just do a quick ask for a quick tour of the tableau in the room, because obviously we don't have name badges in front of us, so it would be helpful for those online to know who's here. I'm John Higgins. I'll be hosting this meeting. I'm chair of the Global Digital Foundation. If I go around to my right and allow you to introduce yourself, Andrew, and this speaker you'll be able to.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Yeah, and it's my pleasure to be here. And I'm Andrew Liu. I come from Huawei company, and I'm responsible for the AI governance standardization and AI based in Beijing. Yeah, this is my first time to meet with you. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Andrew.
Looking forward to the discussion. Yeah,
thank you.
Hello, I'm Bertie Muller. I'm chair of the Society for the Study of Artificial Intelligence and Simulation of Behavior, or AISB for short. This is one of 2 UK national societies on AI research that are part of the Your AI umbrella organization. And I'm from Swansea University, where I'm a lecturer in computer science.
Hello, everybody. I'm Enrico Panay. I'm an AI ethicist, co-convenor in Sun-Satellite in the working group 4.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Len Hawkes. I'm a solicitor admitted at the ABFG in Brussels. So I've been here in Brussels for more than 30 years now, and I'm working particularly on data protection rather than artificial intelligence. But of course, there are big connections between.
Yes. Hello, my name is Britt Hecht from BBVA, which is a Spanish bank. And I'm also here in Brussels for quite some time now. But anyway, I'm working in digital policy, and well, I've seen the development of everything that's digital finance for the last decade.
Excellent, thank you, Britt.
Hello, I'm Patrice Chevron, formerly with Digital Europe, and I worked with John there, and I still work a bit for AI for People, a think tank involved in AI, obviously. Thank you.
Patrice, thank you. Welcome, Klaus.
Yeah, hello, my name is Klaus Dieterx. I'm heading the association EUnite. It's a European Engineering Industry Association. I'm also chairing the Orgalim task force on artificial intelligence. So I've been following AI for a while now, and looking forward also to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you
for having me.
Orgalim is an organisation people won't maybe not know, and is an important organisation here in Brussels, isn't it? Do you want to just mention a little more?
Yeah, Orgalim is a big umbrella association for machinery, basically. A lot of it is B2B products, but also B2C. So there's a whole range of machinery engineering products, but also clearly all of these go through a digital transformation. And therefore, the focus of Orgalim also is strongly on the latest, I would say, digital files in Brussels under negotiation. Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome. I won't ask everyone online to make an introduction, but maybe if later on when you join in the conversation, you could introduce yourself, that would be great. Global Digital Foundation formed a few years ago, maybe 6 or so years ago, with a particular focus on overcoming bumps in the road that might hamper society and the economy to take advantage of the digital opportunity, if I can put it like that. Focusing on some specific things, one might say almost sort of some random things, but we've looked at those issues that have been seen to us to be particularly important, like hate speech online, or digital markets, lots of different topics. And one topic that came to us a couple of years ago is the issue of what we call AI assurance. In other words, how do you build confidence with your customers and society more broadly that your use of AI, as I like to think of it, is cool, not spooky. That is a good thing and not a slightly worrying thing. We started work on particularly on looking at how what we call the AI value chain, or the AI supply chain, might pass information upwards and downwards, I suppose, and across within itself, to satisfy others in the value chain that they could be confident that their partners were also using AI in a way that was cool and not spooky. I mean, more specifically, complied with whatever the regulation of the day was, but also was societally acceptable. I mean, I think it's not just enough to obey the letter of the law, but it's also societally acceptable. We found that we were a bit early in that discussion because I think a response from many companies was, well, we need to know what these regulations are before we start looking at how we might be complying with them. I suppose that sort of makes sense. Even though they were already beginning to think about, well, what does it mean to be transparent? What does it, these issues were already being debated. So we, as in the way of things, we pivoted slightly and we said, okay, well, if all these people are thinking about it from different perspectives, whether that's companies or standards bodies or public bodies, governments, and obviously European institutions, why don't we form just a club, a group of people who care about these things, who want to learn from each other. We'll produce an a monthly newsletter, and we'll start to do some specific work in some particular areas as and when we're ready to do it. And so the AI Assurance Club was born. We've held meetings like this around just in Europe so far, in London, Berlin, Copenhagen, and by sort of, if I'm honest, probably more by luck than judgment, we've stumbled across some quite interesting developments on that road. So, for instance, when we were in Copenhagen, we spoke to the Danish government, who had been given some money by the European Commission to look at a project for developing guidelines for public sector use of AI. And no one had done this yet, but the public sector in Denmark we're asking, well, if we're going to use AI, how do we know we're using it safely? We need some guidelines or something. So, and it seems to us that this is just one of many such initiatives responding to the pressures to, well, I want to use AI, but I want to use it safely. I want to keep it, to use my words, cool, not spooky. I want to be safe in my use of AI. So we formed the AI Assurance Club, and that's that's an example of when we went round the different meetings, talking to people in different countries. These are the sorts of examples that we found. We thought it was about time we held one in Brussels, and the timing seems about right now, although it's very difficult to keep up with all the new initiatives. There seems to be new initiatives on PACs and new things coming out from, is it from competing commissioners? I'm not actually quite sure, but there seems to be new initiatives come out regularly, and so we thought it was time to hold a meeting. A virtual meeting, but based with some of us based in Brussels is the way to look at it. Now, moving on to the first item on our three-part agenda, the story today is this first topic I will come to, followed by a discussion about that program of specific works I talked about, which will be, in fact, the last item, and then, but in the middle, we'll also have an update on global policy developments. How are policymakers around the world responding to the developments in AI. But first, it seems to me that no good meeting on AI at the moment would be complete without tackling the topic of is AI an existential threat, which I believe is now a meme. And we've got two great contributors to the conversation that we're going to have to get the discussion going this afternoon. Bertie's already introduced himself a little, but the AISB that Bertie referred to, the academic institution, I think it was formed in 1964. I mean, that makes it nearly 60 years old. I mean, that's quite some record. And when I looked at the sort of topics that you were covering in your program at the moment, it's very varied. I mean, your program included a couple of things that struck out from me was design and engineering of AI components. So, looking at the sort of hard end of engineering components, to computational appreciation of artifacts, including human artwork. I mean, so a very broad. The point I'm making here is the AISP has a very broad agenda, from hard engineering to societal impacts. I mean, maybe that's right. And Bertie, if you want to talk any more about the AISP or your work, I'm sure you will. Callum Chase, who's the other conversationalist here, if I can put it that way, is a very well-known futurist. Has written a couple of factual books, a couple of non-fiction books, which are great reads. I'd recommend them. He's also the guiding light in the Economic Singularity, both club and foundation now. And with a colleague, he also hosts a very successful podcast, London Futurist Podcast. I've had some great speakers on there. I'd definitely recommend you go and have a listen to them. There's one, I can't remember, maybe Callum, you will tell us, I can't remember the guy's name, but it's somebody who talks about their use of GPT-4 in their everyday work as an academic, and how they're actually using it and making massive productivity gains by doing so. So it's really good to have, both sort of practical understanding of what does GPT-4 and how is it being used. And I thought that was a particularly interesting podcast, but just one of many. Now, I said that no good meeting would be complete without discussing this question of is AI an existential threat or not? And I'm going to ask you to vote on this. Now, I know that the way we frame questions can be very important, and in particular, I think with an academic audience, people might say, well, is that the precise question you want to ask? Well, so what I'm going to do rather than that, I was going to say, no, you've got a choice of two doors you're going to walk through. One door says AI is an existential threat, and the other door says AI is mainly a productivity tool. Right, so you've got to choose. I know it's not a perfect life, but you've got to choose which door are you going to walk through. Existential threat, productivity tool. So I'm going to ask you in the room and online. So obviously we only need to choose one door. If you think you would choose to walk through the door, AI is the existential threat. See, I can't even say it. If you want to walk through that door, the existential threat door, could you please put your hand up online now? And can you put your hand up in the room if you think that is the case? 1, 2, 3. Okay, 3. 4 from Callum. I couldn't see you against the pale blue background. 4. Okay. Well, Callum, if you're going to argue that, then you. Oh, I think that might have been a little. I'm not sure whether that was. I'll put my hand up and take it back down again. So most of us think not. You can put your hands down now. So most of us think that. So I think what that means, Callum, is if you're going to argue on that side of the debate, then you're going to you've got some persuading to do. Whereas I think, Bertie, you can just go home. Really, I mean, your job's done. Anyway,
You should check the counter thing. Maybe someone won't.
Oh no! I know exactly. That's a very academic, answer the question properly. But no, I think we've got a sense. We've got a sense here. I did like before I just bring you in. I did like the paper, which I think must have been a bit tongue-in-cheek from the Centre for Data and Innovation here in Brussels, that said, well, if we think AI is an existential threat, should we also start preparing for alien invasion? Because that surely is also an existential threat. So, maybe that will be the topic of our next debate. No, not really. So in which case, I think I'm going to turn first of all then Callum. I mean, can you make the case for why only 4 people in the room are right and the rest of us are wrong. What's the argument here? And maybe Rob, you could make sure that everybody's just looking at Callum, not on the gallery view, while I do the same in this end here, if I can. So Callum, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think I want to do a Schrodinger's vote because I want to go through both of your doors.
Oh.
I think that artificial intelligence, like any technology, can have fantastically useful applications, great benefits, and is also risky. I mean, our very first technology was when we tamed fire. Fire keeps you warm, keeps the nasty big animals away, cooks your food, but also can burn you to death. And ever since then, almost all of our technologies have either had the possibilities for great benefits and possibilities for great harm. AI is our most powerful technology, so the harms are potentially greater. Firstly, I guess we have to convince people that superintelligence is going to be created. And what do I mean by superintelligence? I mean a machine which has all the cognitive abilities of an adult human, and some of those abilities are superhuman. We already have lots of machines which are superhuman in certain limited respects, playing chess, playing Go, but there isn't a machine yet which has all the cognitive abilities of an adult human. Will we create such a machine? The answer is yes, unless one of three things is the case. Either we stop developing AI, which actually isn't entirely impossible, but I really don't think it's going to happen, or humans are actually at the pinnacle of the possible space of, or the possible tree of intelligence, which I think is an absurd proposition, or that there's some odd thing going on in human brains which can't happen inside machines and perhaps can only happen in the sort of flesh and blood substrate that we have, the 3.5 pounds of goop in our skulls. And I see absolutely no reason for that whatsoever either. So it seems to me inevitable that we will create superintelligence. The two questions are when, and we don't know the answer to that, and will we like it? Now, actually, John, can I share a slide? I know if I press this thing, can I share that slide? Are you all seeing a slide now?
Yes,
great. Okay, so here's a depiction of what I think are the possible outcomes of superintelligence, and hopefully this will make it full screen. On the left-hand side of the slide are the outcomes which we create, and on the right-hand side of the slide are the outcomes which machines create, and it'll either be one or the other. And at the top of the slide are things which are desirable, and the bottom of the slide are things which are undesirable. And there are 4 C's. These scenarios break down into 4 C's. So we'll go from undesirable to desirable, first with the human side and then with the machine side. If we were to do what you might well think is a sensible step and say, superintelligence is potentially very risky, it's an existential threat, so we shouldn't create it, we would cease, we would stop making advanced AIs. And it is actually possible, I think, given the reaction to the Future of Life Institute call for a 6-month moratorium, that in the democracies and China, that might happen. But it wouldn't happen in Russia, it wouldn't happen in Korea, not all the billionaires in the world would stop. And there are probably mafia organizations which wouldn't stop. So it seems to me, if we did stop, either have a moratorium or a permanent stop on the development of advanced AI in the democracies in China, all that would happen is we'd end up with superintelligence being introduced into the world in the hands of bad actors, which isn't a very good outcome. I call it the undesirable outcome of the human-led side because it would also deprive us of all the tremendous benefits of AI. And I won't go into those because this is a debate about existential risk, but the upsides, the possible upsides of more and more advanced AI are astonishing, really quite astonishing. The desirable outcome on the human side of the scale is that we figure out how to control really advanced AIs. But what that means is figuring out how to control forever an entity which is much, much cleverer than us. I'm assuming that superintelligence is intelligent. I'm not assuming that it's conscious, by the way. I'm not even assuming that it's got a human level degree of agency. But any intelligence will have goals, because intelligence is the pursuit of goals and learning and improving how you pursue them as you go, because you learn. So it seems to me implausible that we will be able to control an entity that's much, much smarter than us, and certainly that we'll be able to control it forever. So sadly, I don't think either of the human-led scenarios are possible. I think what's going to happen is out of our control. It will be out of our control. The undesirable side of the machine-led scenarios is catastrophe, that machines perhaps become conscious and decide that they don't like us, or just take a view on our impact on the world and decide they don't like us without being conscious, or they destroy us inadvertently. They make a change in the composition of the atmosphere, or set off some nukes inadvertently and destroy us by accident. But there's also the positive outcome of machine-led superintelligence, which is consent. And by consent, I mean the machines consent that we should continue to exist. And in fact, they rather like us and decide to help us flourish. So these, I think, are the 4 possible scenarios. As I say, I think it's out of our hands. I think once superintelligence arrives, we will no longer have control. Personally, I'm an optimist. I know that optimism is a form of bias, just like pessimism is, but it's a lot more fun than pessimism. So I think that consent is, on balance, the most likely outcome. But catastrophe is entirely possible, and therefore superintelligence is an existential risk. That's my pitch.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Callum. And although I sort of rather, in a slightly showmanship way, set the two doors to go through, I don't really want this to be one side and the other side, because I know there's much more intelligent debate to that. So your contribution to this, Bertie, having studied in this area for many years and leading this fantastic institution, your views on this would be most welcome.
Okay, so where to start? First of all, Callum kind of had the assumption that superintelligence will be there. Now, looking at the media today, very recently, OpenAI announced that they are hoping to counter superintelligence, and they're actually forming a team that will research anti-superintelligence. They call it superalignment. Now, what exactly they want to align, I don't know, but I think there might still be a way to avoid superintelligence in the form that Callum kind of suggested here. I do agree that there's risks around AI, there's risks around lots of technology, and I wouldn't necessarily say that the risks we're looking at, and these might or might not be existential risks, are solely AI-based. Now, of course, that goes back to what is the definition of AI, and the simplest definition would say, well, everything that has an if statement somewhere is actually AI. If that's all AI, then okay, we've been dealing with this a long time. But what we're really facing is technology is becoming faster and faster at making decisions that we have in the past few years more and more agreed to be taken by technology without human supervision. And that is the main reason why I think there's a huge risk. And that is where we need to make sure that we build our technology in a way that it is reliable, that it is kind of responsibly designed, and that it is resilient. Those are the 3 R's that I try to promote typically. And the reliability part of things, we've got lots of experience with that. There's formal methods that have now been applied to AI as well. So we can prove certain things will happen, certain things will not happen for many systems. Now, of course, there are traditional and AI systems where some properties can't be proven, or it would take way too long to prove all of this. But critical systems need to be scrutinized, and we need to make sure that they work reliably. the responsibility aspect is far more complicated, and out of the three is probably the one that's least studied so far, and that includes all kinds of ethical aspects, all kinds of well, biases that might be in data sets, that might be required in data sets, because essentially bias is something that surrounds us everywhere in human life, and kind of eradicating it everywhere would not be a solution at all. But also looking at kind of in combination with the resilience part, can such biases and such modifications be introduced by bad actors? That is something we need to look at more and more carefully. And essentially what my motto is these days is we need to look at AI as something that we used to look at as computer science, being the central thing that connects various domains, various disciplines, and will play a part everywhere. Nowadays, of course, computer science is everywhere, but AI is everywhere as well. And that has taken this central piece of connecting disciplines, connecting, well, discourse in philosophy, in humanities, sociology. Everywhere we have influence of AI, and be it as a model for, say, society or something that influences society. And in all of this, I think we need to look at cybersecurity as well. That's part of that resilience package, and learn from cybersecurity in the way we deal with AI systems. And that learning process, I don't think necessarily means that we need to mimic everything, but take on board a lot of the processes around cybersecurity that have become practice, that are regulated partly, and use similar aspects and similar approaches for AI. Now, one of the things where this doesn't really match is what for AI has been called for many, many years, and that is that kind of, well, the on-off switch, the backdoor that a human should have to the AI system. And now cybersecurity researchers have come to the conclusion that backdoors are not a good idea at all. So there's a bit of a conflict there, and that's certainly something that we need to look at more in the future.
So that, I have this model in my mind that most of, in a sense, what you've been talking about, we've encountered before, as you say, in cybersecurity. It's about how do we put safe products on the market of one sort or another. I know there are some particular things about things that can learn and do things that we can't predict, that we need to sort of get under the skin of in due course. But there's a set of things about to do with responsibility and reliability and all those things. You could argue we've dealt with that already, and we'll come on to that, I think, a little bit later in the meeting. But what I'm interested in particularly maybe here is unpicking what we mean by super intelligence, because it almost implies, Callum, that there is something beyond just ever faster decision-making software that learn from the data. Is there? I mean, Callum, when you think of super intelligence, I mean, how are you defining it? What are the attributes of it? When will it become super intelligence and not just faster software?
When it's smarter than us. Artificial general intelligence has become the normal phrase for a machine which has the same degree of intelligence as us. And a super intelligence is simply anything that's smarter than us. And intelligence is our superpower. Interestingly, it's not rational thought that's our superpower. It turns out it's the ability to believe in stories which we know aren't true, things like money and democracy and monarchy. But whatever the mechanism is, intelligence is what means that we control the planet and no other species has any say whatsoever. We're not very different from chimpanzees biologically, but there's 500,000 of them, there's 8 billion of us, and the chimpanzees have no say whatsoever in their future. We decide what happens to them. And when superintelligence arrives, we will be in the same position as the chimpanzees, with one significant difference is chimpanzees don't know about the predicament they're in. We will know the predicament we're in, assuming the superintelligence decides to let us hang around for long enough to find out. It is just not possible for any entity to control the behavior of another entity which is a great deal more intelligent than it. And so we will lose control.
But I mean, Bertie, is there much actual, I mean, what do you know about the state of research into AGI, this artificial general intelligence or superintelligence? Because it seems to me, even when you look at these large language models and the transforming of the GPTs, they're largely probability engines that they can't take in multiple different sensory inputs and juggle, I don't know how warm it is today with, or even things that they've not been asked to deal with in the past. I mean, the vast variety of inputs that we deal with as human beings doesn't seem to me that there's anything getting close to that ability. Am I just being naive or over optimistic, or have I just
I think there's still large areas of what we associate with human intelligence that we haven't seen in machines at all. So there have been some approaches at simulating feelings, but do machines have real emotions? What is an emotion even? Can machines be creative? And all of these things, emotional intelligence is something that humans have. Humans work on feelings. We have a gut feeling and we act according to that. Will a machine be able to do that? We use, typically in our reasoning, a lot of context that is not directly connected, or not to our knowledge at least directly connected to what we make decisions about. But that is background knowledge, background information, gives context, where we hardly see that in machines today. Of course, things might change, but there's a large number of researchers in the various disciplines who firmly believe creativity cannot be achieved by machines. Machines can certainly assist us in our creativity. They can go through many, many scenarios and look at lots of randomly generated combinations in a very short amount of time, but we can't. But it's not really what makes humans creative
or super intelligent. I mean, Callum, what is it that causes you to think super intelligence is being developed, or we're making progress towards super intelligence, rather than I don't know, smarter flight bookings on EasyJet, and what's the best word to follow this word in ChatGPT? I mean, where do you think this? What's really causing you this concern about super intelligence is round the corner? Although I know you haven't said how far that corner is, but what gives you that concern?
Well, because we're very obviously on the path to doing it. It is absolutely true that we don't have AGI now. And like I said before, we don't know how far away it is, but we should bear in mind that our computer technology, along with many others, is improving at an exponential rate, and that's incredibly powerful. The two, what I would call AGI labs, the two frontier labs in the world, DeepMind and OpenAI, were founded by people who are explicitly trying to create AGI. That's what they said they're trying to do. Sam Altman, John, I can't remember if you were on the call that we did with Sam Altman. I think you were. He said when we had a call with him, which was about 2.5 years ago, that it was probably 10 years to AGI, and we all thought he was batshit crazy. Well, when he launched GPT-4, we had to revise that conclusion quite dramatically. Demis Hassabis some time ago said he expected AGI to arrive sometime this century. And I think that was probably much closer to the consensus view. But since the launch of GPT-4, which is not AGI, clearly it's not AGI, and it's quite a long way off, but it's a big step in that direction. Since GPT-4 was launched, a whole load of people who are, much more expert than me, like Jeff Hinton, Joshua Bengio, and many others, have said, wow, it looks like AGI is coming much sooner than we all thought. I don't really worry too much about whether AGI is going to arrive. Well, I suppose I do from a personal point of view, but intellectually, I don't worry too much about whether it's going to arrive in the next 5 years or the next century. I just think it's self-evident that we are on the path towards it because we are improving the level of intelligence in our machines. And if we keep doing that, then sooner or later, they are going to become more intelligent than us. We're spending vast amounts of money to make this happen. Our level of intelligence was produced by a very slow and very inefficient, but in the long term, quite effective process called evolution. We are applying a much more powerful, much more deliberative process called science to do the same thing, to create intelligence, to create a very powerful intelligence. And the reason why we want to do it is that intelligence is a superpower. So the more you have of it, the more power you have. And that's what humans crave, is more power, because we want to make stuff happen. We want to live longer. We want to be richer. We want to make everybody happy. So it's almost self-evident to me that we are on the path to superintelligence, and that we'll get there unless one of the three things I mentioned before is the case, that there's some magic going on in human skulls that can't be replicated in machines, or that we stop, or that for some reason we're at the top of the tree that's, of possible intelligence. And I think all of those three things are obviously not true.
If I can demonstrate my lack of superintelligence for a moment, I can't read the chat and listen to people at the same time. But Kat, I wonder if you could have a quick scan at the chat and see if there's anything. I know this is a terrible thing to ask, but is there anything that you particularly would draw our attention to? Maybe you could take a moment to just have a look at that, because I don't think we've got time at this stage to open it up to a general discussion. But
John, that's fine. So yeah, I think that there's some interesting discussion about robotics. So I don't know if Rob wants to come in that. But yeah, someone has mentioned, they were watching a robotics demonstration just this morning at the AI for Good Summit, which had a sort of on-stage failure. So Rob, who's obviously a robotics specialist, is talking about how robots are still horribly brittle. And there's still many examples of this kind of failure, or I guess lag behind like other areas of AI research and development. I don't know if that's a fair summary, but if anyone else wants to come in on that.
I won't open it up at this stage, because I'd like to, capture all the content, as it were, and from our discussions on these three topics. And then we'll have some time, I think, maybe to synthesize the whole thing, because I can see if we just all discuss whether there is or there isn't, I'm going to guess we're not going to add a lot to the very good conversations that we've had. Any last word from you, Bertie, on any of the points that Callum just raised there? That DeepMind, OpenAI, and loads of others are channeling lots of money into this. We've got a lot more behind it than simple evolution. Any last comment before we move on?
Yeah, I'm still not convinced that we'll see AGI in the very near future. And I think there's smaller steps to make to mitigate against risks that are much, much more important to us now. And by doing so, we can build a path to mitigate against risks that possible AGI can bring.
I will ask, if I remember, if I forget, remind me. I'll ask at the end of the meeting, are you any more persuaded that it's an existential threat now than you were at the beginning of the meeting? I was once debating in the an FT conference whether GDPR was a hammer to crack a nut. And I carefully prepared all the arguments that I could to try and persuade the audience that GDPR was way over the top. And I made this very eloquent presentation. I don't remember, we worked on it. It was only a 10-minute pitch. And at the end of it, I had moved the needle not one jot. And what that persuaded me, a little bit like Brexit as well, you can make all the arguments you think, but you won't change people's minds most of the time. People come to an opinion. But anyway, we'll come back to that question at the end. What I'd like to do now is introduce Kat, who's our head of research. You've just seen her here on the screen. Kat produced with Rob, my colleague Rob, an excellent report last year looking at global responses by policymakers and regulators, but policymakers particularly, to try to help society feel safer about the use of AI. We'll be producing an update of that. And Kat's done an interim analysis of responses. And I thought it would be useful for us all to have this quick run around the world to see how policymakers are responding, to some extent in the light of the recent developments, more media awareness of GPT and and the developments of large language models generally. I mean, we've seen some responses from Europe, European policymakers, but how have people been reacting? And so I thought it would be useful for us all, Rob and I thought it would be useful, and Kat to get that update. So Kat, if we could, if I can hand it to you.
Thanks, John. I'll just share my slides and let me know if these come up okay.
Yeah, we've got them.
Perfect. Yeah, so as John says, I'm Kat Gray, as well as my work with Global Digital Foundation and the AI Assurance Club. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Bath and a visiting researcher at Sciences Po in Paris. So I'm going to be just presenting a preview really of a report that will come out in September this year. So as John said, last year we initiated this report that has a few different purposes, but really it's to give a snapshot in time of AI governance and assurance initiatives around the world. So we can give a closer examination of some select countries and regions, and it will give us the ability to compare with previous years. So year on year, we can track trends, see where there's continuity, so see where maybe there's diverging approaches or convergence between and among states. And we're trying to look a bit beyond just formal policy instruments and legal instruments to look more at what these mean in practice. So this is really important from an AI assurance perspective, of course. We are really interested in how these norms and rules and standards then translate into something operational for businesses to use. Clearly this year there have been some really important legislative developments in particular, so most notably in the EU. I won't talk too much about the EU, and I know we're in Brussels today, but other than to just say negotiations are now at the stage where the different institutions are going to work together to kind of hash out the final text of the AI Act. But it's worth bearing in mind a huge amount of work still has to be done in developing the standards that will be really key and complementary to the legislative provisions. So what's new this year? I think firstly, it's quite clear that tech companies, the kind of tone and the appetite maybe for explicit calls for regulation. There's been quite an uptick in that. So we heard, I think Callum mentioned before, Sam Altman. So here he is giving his views before Congress earlier this year. So a lot of people, I think, were quite taken by surprise by just how supportive some of the tech company CEOs were of a more robust kind of approach to AI regulation. So he said, I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong. And we want to be vocal about that. We want to work with the government to prevent that from happening. And we're seeing this reflected as well in, I'll talk more about the UK in a moment, but in what Rishi Sunak in the UK has been saying. He's now promoting the idea of, for example, a CERN for AI, which echoes Sam Altman. There's been a lot of discussion about exactly what sort of modalities this sort of global governance or new bodies might take, and we can maybe discuss that after. So yeah, there's many examples of that. The UN Secretary General, he's called for, I think, International Atomic Energy Agency type model. Some would argue, I think, that maybe the governments should focus their energy more on national regulatory capacity, and that maybe looking too much at this international plane in governance might kind of distract them or divert attention away from where it might be most productive at the moment. So as well as this, we've got a new focus on generative AI. You know, although the architecture and the technology behind, for example, the GPT series is not entirely new. It's in the past year, of course, that this has become popular and something that the wider public is interested in and indeed quite concerned about. We've also seen a shift, I guess, towards a more multimodal type of generative AI, although that's still fairly limited, I think it's fair to say. And there's been a shift from towards more of a concern with what we might call sovereign capabilities. Obviously, the market in AI products and services and components and so on is highly concentrated with a handful of globally operating entities. I think we all know who they are. So there's a huge concentrations of capital, access to data, and highly skilled workforce. And clearly these companies are a driving force behind development and ownership of the technologies, fundamental research, production, and the distribution. So it means that countries, and indeed the EU, struggle still even to bridge this widening technological divide. Tony Blair last week put it that how you understand, master and harness this technology revolution will define the place of this country and the shape of the world. And that's reflected in recent investments that the UK has committed to, close to £1 billion, I think, for the new supercomputer. So that's their sort of bid to boost UK developers competing in the global market. And finally, there's been a shift towards implementation of principles and some existing rules, but this is still fairly early. So we've got examples like the New York anti-bias, non-discrimination hiring law. That's not the actual name of the law. That's just come into force the other day. So we're still waiting to see how these binding rules will actually operate in practice, but also come under legal challenge as well, because I think there's probably quite a lot still to be elaborated. There's a lot of work at the moment to streamline as well. So last year in our report, one of the things we found was that policymakers are still largely preoccupied with things like definitions, taxonomies, and terminology, and how to get that kind of consistency that would make these things workable. But we're finding like more of a convergence towards, in particular, the OECD. So I think I'll go into this one. So I thought it would be useful to just go through. I've picked 4 countries, so we're not going to do every country in the world. We didn't last time, but it makes sense to pick out a few, and we hope that we get quite a good geographical spread in the report as well. But in the report, we'll also be looking at regions, regional initiatives in, for example, the African Union, and intergovernmental agreements as well. So I'll skip the slide. So where governments have found it quite difficult to get binding commitments, they've coordinated some of these issues through things like the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, and there's a new EU-India Trade and Technology Council similar to that, and through the G7 as well. So we're seeing more activity on that front. So turning to China, over the past couple of years, China's adopted rules to limit the use of or to govern the use of recommendation algorithms and what they call deep synthesis technology, so things like deep fakes. But this year, they were also the first country to propose any kind of regulation targeting generative AI systems. So this is, I think, expected to enter into force by the end of this year. And it includes obligations to design generative tools so that they're accurate and true, that they embody core socialist values, and that they do not discriminate based on characteristics including race, faith, and gender. And at the end of May, I believe the State Council published its work plan for 2023, and there was some announcement in there of a new draft AI law. So that will be submitted for further consideration. And we're fortunate to have in the room, of course, as well, knowledge and expertise about what China's doing. So it would be great to hear from Andrew and others a bit more maybe on how this is developing. Yeah, so in the UK, I have mentioned a couple of things already. The major development this year, of course, has been the AI regulation white paper, which was very anticipated. And I think by any interpretation, the overall approach has been characterized as quite light touch, compared certainly to the EU AI Act. The approach taken in the UK is broadly not to legislate, it's to be quite reliant on existing sectoral regulations and existing regulators, as well as general legal frameworks like data protection law. So actually very few significant market failures were really identified in the white paper, and it doesn't propose any new duties either on AI actors, so different actors within the value chain such as developers, or on regulators, or doesn't really give them, propose at the moment anyway, to give them any new powers. It's pretty much entirely voluntarist at the moment. But already since March, there's been a renewed focus, I think it's fair to say, and Rishi Sunak's announced, of course, the UK wants to lead the way by hosting an AI safety summit later this year with like-minded governments. And as I mentioned, he's expressed support for the idea of something like CERN for AI in principle, but it's maybe quite unclear what this would look like. There's not a lot of detail. Other things to note, OpenAI have announced that they're planning to open a London office, so that's one to watch. And I think it's fair to say the UK approach is quite in flux. There's an ongoing consultation that they're analysing on the white paper. So I think we'll expect maybe a slightly more interventionist kind of tenor, or if not new measures, perhaps. In the US, like the UK, the approach is shifting towards a more muscular regulatory strategy. The White House last year set out its stall on what it called the AI Bill of Rights. So this is another non-binding initiative, but it's more like a statement of intent from the Biden administration. And it's a very clear signal to the market that the market's not going to be entirely left alone. And this year, the NIST has released their risk management framework. So this has been in the works for a couple of years, and it largely again aligns with quite similar OECD documentation and, for example, models of what the AI lifecycle looks like and how to assess risk. And this is a picture of the FTC chair, Lina Khan, so that's the Federal Trade Commission. She's been quite forthright in calling for greater enforcement of existing laws, so antitrust law. She wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, "We must regulate AI, here's how." And in that, she warned of AI risks around market dominance by large tech firms, collusion, and potential for increased fraud and privacy violations. So it's the kind of discourse in the US is really about digital markets and concentration of market position. And again, we have companies like Microsoft even calling for the creation of a new US agency or executive order. And finally, I want to talk a bit about Brazil. They've had a number of attempts at drafting legislation. Their latest one, I think, was developed towards the end of last year. So they had a commission and they presented a report to the Senate with a sort of study on like different options, and that included a draft regulation on AI. So they're deliberating on that at the moment, and it's worth noting that it's in some ways takes quite similar or quite similar structure or ideas from the AI Act. So one of its key pillars is around risk classification. So like the AI Act, you have a kind of the idea that there's different levels of criticality. So in Brazil, it's called excessive risk, where it's, you know, these are unacceptable and should be banned applications. And then with high risk systems, that's where most of the provisions kick in. So they would be things very similar again to what would be deemed high risk in the EU, things like human resources, recruitment, and critical infrastructure. And unlike the AI Act, it deals with civil liability. So that's being in Brussels, that's being dealt with in a separate piece of legislation that will come in, or that process is going to kind of jumpstart a little bit. Now, I think that like trilogues have started, but it's all one piece of legislation, proposed legislation in Brazil. So I'm going to stop there with the countries, but I've just proposed a few questions that might be helpful just to prompt discussion. We don't have to stick to these, of course, and I'm sure John will have other things that he wants to pick up on from all of that as well. But I think, you know, one of the key questions is how influential the EU's approach is going to be. You know, the so-called Brussels effect, is that something that seems likely? Or is the EU really going to be going at it alone? Then a question maybe about policy lag is there's a sense, I think, in a lot of discussions that the technology is developing at such a pace that policymakers and regulators are always going to be on the back foot, that they're too reactive, not proactive enough, maybe don't have the right horizon scanning kinds of capabilities. And if that's something that, you know, states, governments should be doing, are they equipped to do that? And then a question around, I mentioned these ideas about a global body or a new agency at the international level to coordinate all of these efforts. And there's different sort of models being mooted around CERN, the IPCC, you know, UN agencies and so on. So is there anything in this, or is this overkill? Would this be, for example, something that would be where we would deal with these more kind of existential questions of risk? And yeah, final question, because I think like it's pretty clear there's an imbalance in global AI governance. How do we stop certain countries and states and regions being left behind, both in the development and benefiting from what AI can bring, but also in the global governance discussions? How can we make sure that everyone's able to participate and maybe avoid some of these very binary kind of dualisms between China on the one hand and the West? So I'll leave it there, and feel free to pick up on any of these questions in the discussion, but I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Thank you very much, Kat, that's great.
Should I leave this up, John?
Well, I was going to suggest maybe take it down for a moment, because and then we in the room can turn to the screen, perhaps. Rob, I don't know if you can do this for me, where we can get a gallery view of everyone so we can see hands. And maybe I need to do it. Yeah, and then, so if you've got a question, then maybe stick your hand up. But maybe, Kat, you could also, because I know you can multitask, could you have a look through the chat and see if there are any things in the chat that you want to pick up on? Well, I just see whether, I mean, Andrew, I don't know if you feel in a position to just say a few words about China and whether you've anything to add to Kat's slide. I mean, any observations about China? I can maybe ask you to do that in a moment. And then, Len, I was wondering if I might also pick on you and ask you about the first question that Kat raises about the influence of the EU, because if you wish, you perhaps could just refer to whether that worked with GDPR. I mean, certainly European policymakers felt quite pleased with themselves about having influenced the global scene on GDPR, rightly or wrongly, but I know they did. So, I mean, Andrew, would you be willing to just say a few words about Chinese regulatory approach?
Okay, maybe I would like to add two comments very briefly, because certainly that we as an industrial player, we can only have the awareness maybe from our view angle, about the policy. The first point is that certainly encouraged by the ChatGPT, and at this year, China, I think, takes the AI risks more seriously, and but what the policy is thinking is still they think a lot how to balance the risk and the development. I think that's the real concern. Yeah. That's point one. That's first point. And the second point is that despite China already gave a draft on the regulation of the generative AI, but it's mostly focused on the internet information service area, not cover all the scenario. It's impossible to do that. But in the practical level, there are issues to be resolved. How to meet these requirements? I think it's still under the exploration and discussion. Yeah, that's the point I want to supplement.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. And as you say, you can only see this from your corporate perspective. But Len, what about this first question? I don't know if you've been following, have a view on whether the rest of the world's following the EU in this area like they did with GDPR.
Well, thank you for hosting the meeting today, and I've got a lot of possible comments, but specifically about what you're asking. I think the general view is that the EU has gone about the task of regulating AI through its risk structure in an intelligent way. Is it having an influence? I can give you a concrete example of why I think it's having an influence. Brad Smith, who's the president of Microsoft, was here in Brussels hosting a meeting on the 29th of June, specifically about AI governance internationally. He gave the keynote speech at that meeting, and he was very engaged with what the EU is doing. I mean, I have to say that I think there was a bit of a double agenda going on, because he let slip, or he mentioned that he'd been in the UK the previous day, the 28th, and had met with governments in some sort of way. And it was announced on the 29th that the review of the Microsoft acquisition in front of the Competition Appeal Tribunal in the UK would go ahead at the end of this month, whereas there had been a request for a delay in order to allow the market authority to spend some more time getting its file in order. So there was obviously some double agenda there, but I mean, for what he came to do, he was obviously very engaged, and just, if I may, to pick up one of the points that was made about superintelligence and the role of human beings. One of the interesting, I thought, sessions at this meeting was that they had arranged for Father Paolo Benanti, who apparently is the advisor to the Pope on artificial intelligence. They'd arranged for him to attend this meeting and to give a presentation. And one of the things that I recall from that struck me was that he showed two pictures of a street in New York. I'm not sure which street, but in 1900, with, and I think it's one of the. Is it anyway? But with all horses and no cars, and then the same streets 10 years later with all cars and no horses. And his point of view was, well, this is going to happen. There is, in a sense, no point in trying to fight against it. The question is, how can human input influence the way that artificial intelligence is used? And I hear the skepticism about that, but so yeah, the answer is the EU is having important influence, and there are at least some US companies who are engaged. Other of the large platforms perhaps will see things in another way.
Thank you, Len.
Yeah, no, just to compliment him. I was after the speech of Brad Smith, and was fascinating, really, very lively and engaging. And as I took from there one of the main messages that there's no sense in trying to fight AI because it will come anyway. But what we have to do is accelerate the regulation in order that it keeps up pace with the pace. And if I may come in on the governance aspect, which he also mentioned, by the way, Brad Smith, the importance of establishing coordination and fora on a global level, or at least more than just regional level. So he was also quoting the TDC, of course. Talking about thinking about governance and coming to the third question was there about this entity. When we came at that conference to that thing, I started to think about another industry where risk plays a very high role, which is financial services. And if you remember, 15 years ago, during the financial crisis, what happened? There was a huge situation of risk, right, for the global economy. And what were the answers to that? The answers, one of the first answers decided on at the G20 level was to establish a regulatory body at international level, which is the FSB, which we now know as FSB, and which developed and started to develop an entire set of governance structure that trickled down to the regions and then in the end to member states. So governance structures plus common rules. All the entire Basel III framework was created there. Taking that example of another industry exposed to risk that you cannot let go as you wish if you want to preserve the economy. So could that be some orientation?
Yeah. Can I check? I can't see anymore. Is there are there any questions or comments?
Yeah,
from
I don't
online?
see specifically about this. I think there's some stuff still on the super intelligence debate. But I wanted to just, if I can, just come back on some of the things that have just been said by others in the room. So I think one of the, just my own reflections really on this idea of setting up a new entity, whether it be a regulatory body, something that's about monitoring, adherence to standards or to binding commitments by states. One of the pieces that I think is potentially missing though is this idea of or something that's about translating or building expertise in a way that has about AI in a very interdisciplinary way that has the legitimacy to establish these kinds of functions. So I think this is, so I think someone mentioned before, I think Bertie talked about before about the importance of that bringing together so many different disciplines, and that's very characteristic of AI as a field. It isn't just computer science, it isn't just tech law, it isn't just like economics. It really does span so many different areas of knowledge. And I think one of the things that's maybe lacking is something that's, and I'm a bit of an advocate for something like the IPCC type process. So that's the climate change panel. So they produce reports periodically, and they have like buy-in. They get buy-in from states that way, and it's really the whole point is it's really evidence-led. So there's potentially another kind of function I think that's possibly missing for this kind of more horizon scanning, or like really not just the implementation of governance, but actually establishing the shared commitments from states in the first place. Maybe a bit abstract, but that's my sort of take on the question.
IPCC might be a better model than for us to think about than CERN. I mean, I know I think I was at an AI conference in the United Arab Emirates a couple of years ago when there was some discussion about global bodies, and people were trying to think of, well, what models, what do we know, what models might already exist. And another one that came up, which was very industry-led, was the ICC, which is the International Chamber of Commerce. And I think over many, many years, they've developed rules for international trading, for instance, and international trading contracts. So, these things can and do exist. I mean, they take a massive amount of effort to. Can anybody else online that you can see with a hand up? And then there's a couple in the room I can see. No. Okay, so Enrico, I think, and then Britt wants to come back in as well.
Yes, I want to thank Kat for the presentation. And just to point that what Andrew said, what we said about the regulation, and all the people that are working on the standards, like myself in Europe, and I saw somebody's working on the UN proposals that are quite important. There is a big problem on harmonizing all those legislation, and I think that it could be one of the most important daily problems in the future. And what we are realizing is that we have a big semantic problem aligning the term we are using, and sometimes they are confusing, and people in the same room cannot understand themselves. So just I'm saying that because in the room I see that a lot of people are working on this stuff, and it could be interesting to see, for example, at the UN level, how they are trying to to harmonize this problem with the several countries.
So, well, let me bring Bertie in and then Brett, because
Oh, just one thing, you mentioned CERN as not maybe being the best example for something that could deal with AI regulation, a similar structure. I was going to say, I think it's very important to keep AI research and AI regulation separated as separation of powers. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any AI experts from the technical side on the regulation side. That wouldn't work either. But certainly we can't simply let AI developers rule on what's going to be regulation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because CERN for AI was one of these early
I think
ideas that was rocked in, wasn't it? You know,
yeah, Claire Lazarus mentioned that 5 years, 6 years ago that we need something, but that was really always meant to be a research lab,
global research,
not the regulation side.
Yeah,
adhering to many of the kind of well, aspects and the promises that regulation brings. But
another good example of why we need a bit more precision in our terminology and semantics, really, because we immediately think of CERN for AI. Most people don't really know what it's just a global thing. CERN don't really know that it's research, and I think it's important to be precise like that.
Now, just to complement and picking on the ideas or the expressions Kat brought up, and with the financial services example, actually there you have exactly that separation between a monitoring function and actually the FSB, which is Financial Stability Board, and then you have the standard setting bodies, which is the Basel Committee, for example, where they set the standards for banks. You have another committee for insurance, another one for markets. And so that you have that separation, and which in the end, then if you think further, has trickled down to Europe here. In Europe, we have the banking authority, the authority for insurance, the authority for markets. They do have exactly that role to observe, provide guidance, and then the regulators come in.
Yeah. So there are many models really that we could draw upon, and a history of success with these models as well, I think. Very good. Anybody wants to pick up any of the either any other points or any of the other exam questions that Kat set for us? We've looked really at the first and third question, but Kat, your second question and your fourth question, just remind us of what those were. I know the fourth one was the left behind, but
so we also have another couple of hands up, but the questions again, so the first one was about the Brussels effect, then the second question was about policy lag, so how our policymakers and regulators bound to fall behind or struggle to keep up with the curve. The third one was about the global entity, we've just discussed that, and then the final one was about making sure all countries and regions can be part of the benefit of AI development and involved in AI governance. We also have hands up from Manuela and Eva, and there was also a comment from Brian pointing out that this question of the AI governance models we'll see from the DSA, so the Digital Services Act, I assume, how well that's enforced. That might be a basis for considering future AI governance models.
Indeed. So Eva, as you happen to be top left on my screen, and then bizarrely, Manuela, you're next. Eva, would you like to ask your question, make your comment?
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm Eva Shimon from Liberties. This is a Berlin-based human rights organization. So I might come from a bit different approach than those who spoke before me. And I would like to make a few comments. First, just piggyback on what Catriona had said about the interdisciplinary approach that would be important for regulating AI, and also about the discussion. And here I just can't stand to make a comment about the, the panel and how we discuss this issue here. So if you just look at the gender imbalance and also the people representing different regions from the world, I think what we are doing here is just the problem that we are facing at the moment related to AI regulation. So the global majority is basically excluded from this discussion, and we are running this very European and very white and mostly very male discussion over AI. And this is the problem that we detected related to the problem and the biases of AI creates across the world, and the impact it makes on people in need, marginalized groups in our societies, and the majority of the world. So this is one thing that I wanted to mention. And I'm very happy that Catriona was on the panel, but I think for next time, it would be much better to invite others also to speak, to give a more colorful point of view. The other part is the Brussels effect that I wanted to reflect on, because my understanding is that there are many layers of AI regulation, and some of those were already mentioned. So standardization is one of the way of regulating, and most of the AI developers are basically asking for this soft law version of AI regulation. There are also code of conduct. They are asking for that, and there is also intergovernmental solutions and also strict law, such as the AI Act that is under process in the EU, and we have seen that there are others in Brazil, also in India. There is an ongoing legislative process, China and the US, and also Canada, just to mention the most important ones. And I think what is important here is that in the EU, we have a network of safety horizontal legal regimes, such as the GDPR, for example. So when we talk about AI and when we talk about AI regulation, we are not talking about basically AI regulation. What we are talking about is AI deployment and risk regulation. And so there is the rights-based approach is missing from the regulatory regime, but in Europe, we are lucky enough to have, for example, the GDPR, and to go a bit further, the Charter of Fundamental Rights. But if you think about the other regions of the world, such as India or China, the safety net of these human rights and the data protection, which is the core of the AI regulation, is just missing. And in those countries where the safety net of regulation is missing, they will be in a huge danger, not only because from competition perspective, and the monopolies will be even bigger and bigger, but also because the enforcement and the oversight of AI regulation will be much weaker than in Europe. So the way we are exporting our AI regulation throughout the world, but without exporting also the safety net that could create potentially a huge risk for all the people on whom those AI systems will be deployed, who don't have the risk mitigation measures. And also it could have then a flip-back effect on Europe when AI systems will be used and deployed on people and then used maybe also on Europeans as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments, Eva, and for pushing us to be even more broadly based in our membership and representation, which we'll continue to work at, and thank you for that. And a very good point about the rights-based approach missing in many parts of the world. But of course, we've also got to be aware that it's not really our job to be missionaries of our values to other parts of the world. We've seen how that can go wrong when we do that. So Manuela, please, your comments.
Okay, hi everybody, and thank you for the very interesting presentation today. So I just wanted to make a comment on the Brussels effect, and also to see what you were thinking about it, because as you know, a few weeks ago, Google released Bard, but they released it in 182 countries, but Europe and Canada as well. And yesterday, just less than 24 hours ago, Meta released the new service, like the new rival to Twitter. It's called Thread, and it will not be available in Europe. So, I mean, thinking about the AI regulation that is now, under discussion in Europe and probably will be approved in the next months, and thinking about the next regulation that will come, what do you think that this could be? The way it is proposed could be a sort of limit to innovation, and that big tech companies, maybe they will move to UK, but not to Europe. Is it something that we should consider? And do you think that since last I don't know who said it, but a few days ago Smith was holding a keynote speech in Brussels. So they're trying to come and talk about AI governance in Brussels, but then they're thinking about the European market as too much regulated and maybe too risky for this moment. So will they stay out of this market, and will they be able to lobby the European Commission to sort of change the sort of the AI Act in the next months and to make it a little bit softer?
It's interesting. I think there was you follow this probably more closely than I do, Manuela, but I think some of the dialogue on Twitter between Sam Altman and Thierry Breton recently has been, well, I paraphrase slightly, Sam Altman saying, well, we'll pull out of Europe, and Breton saying, oh, come on, there's no time for blackmail here, what's going on? But there does seem to be with these, and I haven't followed them in detail, but these AI pact ideas and the AI initiative coming out from Breton and from Vestager seem to be an attempt to, come on, let's have a common view. Maybe even just trying to forestall a US-UK approach. But Manuela, what's your sense of that? Do you think that, to the question you asked, what's your answer? Do you think this is just posturing, or
It's hard to answer, I would say. I don't know, honestly. I think that if you think about the trilogue going on now, the position of the council is quite different from the one of the commission and the parliament. So I think that there will be, a different final version, the one that will be approved. And also considering that they really want to approve it before the end of the mandate of this commission. So probably, the deadline, which should be next year, but will be before at the end, to make sure that it's approved before the new election are coming. Probably there will be some sort of concession. So I think that it will change a little bit. Considering the pressure from industry on one side, there was a letter that was signed by 150 top AI companies in Europe that they were asking for, a softer AI Act. And then considering also, the deadline that they have, probably there will be some concession, I think.
John, we have a couple of hands up. Sorry, Emmanuel, if I was interjecting there. Just so John's aware, there's a couple of hands up. We've got Marcus and Foster.
Yeah, so let's take those comments, Marcus, and then Foster.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great session, and for sharing your insights, and also to Katrina for giving the roundup and summary where we are in the global regulatory landscape. So one little interjection I wanted to make, following on from Enrico's point early on. I'm the project lead at the United Nations and have been working on a project with the formal title Regulatory Compliance of Products with Embedded Artificial Intelligence or Other Digital Technologies. That is still up for public consultation, but will close over the weekend. And I'm very happy to share some slides I presented at the UN, I think it was end of May, about this particular project. The idea was initially to develop a UN-wide policy recommendation We changed it a little bit now. We made it a little bit more flexible and turned it into what we at the moment called white paper draft for this policy. Once the public review closes, I've received already comments and some challenges and suggestions. I will consolidate them. The paper will then be translated into the official languages and will be tabled later this year, I think it's in November, at the annual session, and then we'll see what the governments will do with that. The idea is at the moment, because this more flexible white paper nature, it could become a UN recommendation. It could also become a declaration. It could become potentially a convention or some kind of treaty. So it gives us, as a policy instrument, a little bit more flexibility, or it also could become a common regulatory framework. So that is for the governments and the international community to decide. But what we've done, we put this very high level generic paper together. It's only about 5 pages and bearing in mind, this is a recommendation for governments and national regulatory authorities. It is not for the industry, producers, providers of AI. And also there's certain limitations in terms of scope. So for instance, autonomous vehicles are not included because there's a separate UN directive covering these kind of products. Autonomous weapons are not included because there's no international agreement how that should be treated at this particular point. But I'm also suggesting there could be later on an international convention for the treatment of AI weapons if there's a feel fitting in with today's topic that there's an existential risk for humanity. So I think that option is still open. What I'll do is I'll pop the link in so you can see the paper and get a bit of an idea and additional information. But thank you. I just wanted to share this here in this forum.
Marcus, and we'd be very happy to circulate that in due course, both attendees and club members. Foster, we'll make this the last intervention, and then there's one last item on the agenda that we'd like to cover. So please, over to you.
Oh, okay, so thank you very much. My name is Foster Kofi-Sam. I don't have a comment, but I have a question. And my question is seeking the opinion of all the panelists. I just want to understand, how does the Brussels effect, impact the adaptation and regulation of AI in Africa, especially, most of the African countries are now trying to shape their own AI strategies, policies, and regulatory framework. For example, Ghana is now developing its own national AI strategy, the same thing to Rwanda and Senegal as well. So I just want to understand, from the opinion of all the panelists and everybody here, how does the Brussels effect impact the adoption and the regulation of AI in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe let Kat give an opinion on that.
I mean, just to caveat, that's not my area of expertise at all, but my kind of initial thoughts on it are, there needn't be a strong Brussels effect. I think that personally, the idea of a Brussels effect is sometimes overstated, and you find that even with GDPR, it hasn't necessarily informed data protection legislation on the African continent or elsewhere, or practice. But there's obviously other, probably far better place for the development of similar norms or frameworks. So I know that the African Union, I don't know much about this, you'll probably know more than me, Foster, but there's no reason really, I think, why there can't be parallel policy processes. I guess it's the question is really like once you bring China into it as well, like if there's a question of how do we stop countries being kind of pitted against each other, I think, in this kind of, or avoid this kind of race sort of narrative, and Africa becoming a region that bears the brunt of that. My view is really just like there needn't be a strong Brussels effect. It's not even it's not inevitable that would be the case. yeah, others probably have more elaborated thoughts than I do.
For several years, I chaired global policy committee for our global group of IT bodies like Digital Europe. And there was a strong group of maybe 20 African countries who participated. And the sense I got was that they were all, and of course their governments were all very good at just doing their homework and seeing who had done what work in advance. And I think one of the reasons that the EU is quite influential is because they do a thorough job. They publish the papers very publicly and they're easily accessible. And because the EU process is as a result of the contribution of many different member states, so you get a sort of richness in the production of them and the end result that people can relate to. So it seems to me that just the very nature of the European process leads to outcomes that people like to go to do their homework. Not uniquely, but I think they're often a very good, rich resource. And I know in my past experience, African countries would use that resource alongside others. Patrice.
Thank you, John. Just on this point, the flip side of the richness of negotiating a wonderful text, which brings us to the fore as the nexus of regulation of GDPR, of privacy, for example. The flip side is that it's impossible to enforce. I mean, just to build on what I said, I mean, one thing is the structure, and the papers are very influential because it's very well done, very well thought out, and the result of the richness of very diverse contributions. Now, the diversity strikes back when it's time to enforce it. I won't go into the details, but everybody around this table knows what are the problems of GDPR. So we may be the standard bearer of how to deal with regulating personal data protection. But when it comes to enforcement, even in our, not that small, but in our region of the world, we have huge problems. So then when we're speaking of a global thing, AI, all these ideas are very well thought out, very human-like as opposed to machine-like. But I think that's the good way forward, but we are far from there in terms of harmonizing, because you're right, it's all a matter of harmonization. So there is a flip side of
very well said. Thank you for that, Patrice. I want to, I mean, that's really good comment, and great to have that sort of real world experience of how it plays out. Thank you for that. I want to move us on the agenda, if I may, where we've got about 22 minutes left of our call this afternoon. And Enrico is going to give us an update on some fairly detailed work that we've begun in the Foundation and in the AI Assurance Club, known as the Multi-Actor Governance Framework, perhaps MAGF 2.0. So Enrico, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Before starting, I wanted just to say that in the ethical field, there is a risk with Africa about ethical dumping. So companies that are moving all the training in countries that have not regulations, then coming back.
Ethical dumping. Okay.
That's taken into account.
And Enrico, thank you for giving this presentation. And Rob, who's on the call, thought it would be a good idea if Enrico stepped in and did this for the group.
Yes.
So thank you.
So I'm presenting it not with a British accent because it's a global presentation, but I will try to do my best to make it clear. The idea is to present what we are doing.
Is this you, or is that our screen?
Yeah.
You any idea? Just okay. Oh, yeah. On the remote. Thank you. CP remote. Thank you. Carry on.
So in this presentation, we are going to talk why AI is a special case for regulation, and I'll give some background on AI regulation standard, and how the AI Assurance Lab was born, and what it's trying to produce at the moment, a multi-actor governance framework. So I think that everybody of us knows the importance of having a regulation, and there are several theories, and one of them is that we are thinking that AI can be like us, and then it's not. And using this model, when we at the beginning we were talking about the problem of existentialism, we were maybe forgetting that we have other epistemological problems that are going to interpret the reality in a different way. And so the problem of having a model that are not adapted to interpret AI bring us to need a new particular regulation. In Europe, that brought to the beginning of the EU AI Act that will maybe finish at the end of this year, but will enter into forces in 2025. And we saw that other regulations were developed, and we know that if any system will not be compliant to the EU Act, it will be very dangerous for companies in the future, because they will face with large penalties for non-compliance. So one of the way to, because the EU Act is based on a risk approach, one of the way to limit this kind of risk is to deliver robust products and to reduce any possible AI risk, at least try to mitigate them. There have been several initiatives in UK and US trying to regulate AI, and so we have seen the AI regulation white paper, the AI Standards Hub, UK GDPR, that it's slightly different from the EU GDPR, the NIST risk framework in US, and the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. Those are all the initiatives outside Europe, and starting from the initiative, the Global Digital Foundation started to reflect how to develop a possible minimal viable solution that resulted in the multi-actor governance framework, at least in a first version. And as at the beginning, John said, when this started, the market thought it was a good initiative, but it was a bit soon. And the requirements and ecosystem both were still at a formative stage. Now we are seeing that the regulation are advancing, and one thing that we are doing in Europe at the moment is that regulation is advancing at the same time as the producing of standards at the European level. But in response to the first answer of the first proposal, the Global Digital Foundation established an AI Assurance Lab to have the opportunity to form a sector-based assurance framework. And that's because even if we are seeing some standards that are present in the market, we needed to build our internal process to mitigate risk before any kind of standard could be active in the market. The EU initiative relating to the AI are huge. We already seen some starting point about AI in the GDPR, but then we developed the Product Liability Directive, the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act, Then AI liability directive, it's really important for allocating the responsibility in the value chain. And all these should go under the umbrella of the AI Act. Now, what is doing the EU in Sensenelec, that is the European body for standardization, is just trying to indicate what kind of standard the Sensenelec should create. And those standards are regulated by 10 different standard requests that go from risk management to the conformity assessment. Now, it is true that this is the objective, but doing meeting every day in the Sensenelec, I can assure that the work to be done is still a lot. So we are integrating some ISO, IEC standards, and but there is still a space for interpretation of what we are using, and that's why I did the comment about the semantic alignment that we still need. We spend hours trying to understand what people are talking about sometimes. And this is an ISO and at a Sensenelec level. However, some good standards have been already published. One of them came from IEEE, but some in ISO were really interesting also. And as is proposed by the AI Assurance Lab, transparency can be a good starting point to develop a shared framework. I added this slide that maybe you do not know. This is the architecture that is using in Sensenelec to create the standard. So basically, the main goal of all the different standard requests is to create trustworthiness, and they should be in a way regulated by a big risk management approach that will work with different quantitative concepts like accuracy, robustness, part of cybersecurity and record keeping and logging, and some part of data governance, and some that are more qualitative approach like transparency or the governance of human oversight. That from the EU perspective is very important because it's related to EU values and fundamental rights that are always quoted by the EU. And all those should be managed. So that's why we are trying to produce a quality management system, and everything should be assessed by a conformity assessment standard. So after the first version of the MAGF that was published in 2021, there was a very detailed approach on how share assurance in the value chain, and those is really important for big companies, but also for medium enterprises, small and medium enterprises, and that's why, and that's because it will be easier for them to understand where is their responsibility, where we should allocate the responsibility. So the assurance, AI Assurance Tab was born with the intent of sharing information with other companies in Europe and to share the best practices and to work and improve the level of transparency that I would remind is not a principle as often is quoted, but is a meta principle that is used to achieve something else like accountability or allocation of moral responsibility. The idea of this work is to put together a high-level exemplar that we can share with the regulatory bodies in Europe. So just giving them an example on how we can allocate, create an assurance framework that could be easy to use and operational. The project process, and I'll arrive to the end, is coordinated and facilitated by the Global Digital Foundation, and generally Rob, that is connected online, is leading our meeting with John here present. And the project members meet monthly. The Global Digital Foundation committed resources to work, and naturally we try to our best to arrive to the meeting prepared and just to write together a good document. So I think that the idea is to arrive to an agreed framework during this year and take account of existing national European regulations like those that are already quoted, Vincent Senelec, TPA such as 2022 UNESCO recommendation on ethics on AI, or maybe, as Marcus quoted before, something that came also from UN. The framework will be made public, and it's hoped that it will form a basis for an industry standard. So just if you want to know more, I suggest to sign up, browse the resource, or attend a future event. And I have to apologize because I'm sure that my presentation is much better than what Rob would have done.
Not at all, Enrico. Rob, you're out of a job. Enrico, good presentation. That was very good. Thank you, but thank you very much. That's excellent. But we have about 10 minutes left. If anybody's got any specific questions on the framework, I mean, one might be, for instance, why should a small group of companies get around the table and do this? Doesn't take a much bigger effort. But I mean, one of the things we know is that even when you have a bigger effort within a Senelec or wherever, it's usually a few companies around the table who are taking the initiative. So I'm very confident that there will be some valuable outcome from this, that it contributes to the wider development. And with Rob's experience and the experience of the people around the table, this will be good content, good outcome, and will contribute to the debate. And and some real hard issues are being surfaced as we go along. So yeah, thank you very much. I don't know if anybody has any specific question about this. I think there's probably the sort of thing we'll take offline if you have. What I'd like to do then is, as we've got just these last few minutes left, is see if anybody's got any general observations on the meeting or any other points anybody would like to make. And then I'm going to ask anybody would change the door they were going to walk through as a result of the discussions this afternoon. So so bear in mind, I'm going to ask you that. Have we changed your mind at all? Any general comments? Was that Patrice? Did you have no?
No, but I have something on the second question.
Oh, okay, on the second question. All right. So, Kat, can you see if there are anything in the chat to pick up on?
No, I don't think so. I think we're talking about Threads, the new app, but I don't see any questions about the talk.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the comments on the chat, which of course we will pick up. Okay, Patrice, you had a general point you wanted to make?
Yeah, the three things. One is the reason why I thought it was good to go through the door of
existential risk,
threat. It was a bit facetious on my side, because I think the other door is too narrow. If it's just a productivity tool, I mean, we have seen over centuries, industry has developed a lot of productivity tools. There is no fuss about that. But existential threat, I don't feel scared at all. But I think it's the only way to get attention. Yeah. The second point I would like to make, having listened to this very interesting conversation, is about semantic, because you were talking about feelings, and feelings are something very important. The word that is missing is body, because Antonio Damasio calls algorithm disembodied minds, and we are body-minded brains. So body makes a difference. So I think it's just something we should pay attention to. And the last thing is a recommendation. If you have time for a very short story, there is one called The Truth of Facts, The Truth of Feeling by Ted Chiang. It's a science fiction novelist, and it's all about our memory. We are not only the architects, the movie directors of our memories. And the machine certainly is more accurate. But who cares about accurate? We have a right to bias. We're mentioning bias. So there is one thing when you go to court and when you're doing with industrial issues, you have to care about accuracy as seen by the machine and as certainly better recorded by the machine. But when you talk about human life, I'm with Ted Chiang. I don't think we should forget that we are the movie directors of our past. Thank you.
No, thank you, Patrice. And of course, as I said, whenever you frame a question like that, you can always debate whether you framed it correctly. And of course, I absolutely agree with you. It's much wider than that. So thank you for those comments. Anybody wish to make any final observations in our meeting this afternoon?
I've got one.
Yes, please.
I think this question about feeling and going with common sense and doing what is intuitive to do is a very interesting but very difficult question. And you will remember from the Brexit discussion the famous expression, well, we don't need experts. We've had enough of experts. Yeah. Just do what you feel. And I think it's a very important question, because just doing what seems intuitive may be a way of being lazy and not really applying enough reasoning to decisions that have to be made. So it was a small part of the discussion, but I think it's a very important question, particularly in this context.
Well, it's this whole question of common sense and bias, and as Patrice says, everyone's entitled to their biases in a way. I mean, everyone's common sense is different as well, isn't it? So it's based on our own experience, and particularly as you go around the world, the idea of common sense can be very different from what the British called, it's not cricket.
And parenthesis, if I may, we are talking about semantic, and your first question was super intelligent. What is it? I think we have to define intelligence, and intelligence defined for humans has been defined for centuries on. I mean, the ability, the skills to adjust to our environment. But intelligence for the machine is probably very different. So do we care about intelligence? Do we care about the definition of intelligence for us, for our life, or do we care about what makes a machine intelligent? I think it's more than a nuance.
So look, that's a very, very good point on which to finish, Patrice. Thank you very much for that. When I worked with Patrice, I learned an awful lot that was very new to me as a Brit, from a very different perspective of a very rich French culture, and that was just one of the many benefits of us working together here in Brussels with colleagues from many different backgrounds. Let me thank Callum, digital nomad. I'm not sure where you are today. I think, are you in Bordeaux now?
In Bordeaux, in riot-free Bordeaux, yeah.
Oh, well, keep your yellow vest handy, Callum. Thank you very much to Bertie, who's come all the way over from the west coast of Wales, which is quite a long way to come for to come over to Brussels. So thank you very much. Kat, you did a brilliant job as ever, and we look forward to that revised report in due course. And then Rico, thank you very much for stepping in and giving the presentation. And I should say a special thank you and welcome to Andrew, who's extended his trip over from China just to join us here in this meeting. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to you all for staying online for a couple of hours. And thank you to colleagues in the room joining us in this beautiful room at the Fondation Universitaire here in Brussels in the B room, lovely room. So thank you very much, and see you all at the next AI Assurance Club. Bye-bye.
So, bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.